Welcome to the Angler's Wisdom Podcast,
supercharged by Amped Outdoors Lithium.
Today, anglers fish longer. Today, anglers fish harder. Today, anglers rely more than ever on their electronics. It all comes down to catching more fish, and today, anglers rely on Amped Outdoors lithium batteries, period.
catch more fish,
Learn tips, tricks,
techniques, and secrets, and decades of angler's wisdom. Welcome to the show.
Oh, yeah! Yeah! Oh!
Oh, that's a nice one.
Yeah!
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Angler's Wisdom Podcast, where every cast is an opportunity, every trip is a lesson, and every episode brings you insights from the best in the business. If you're turning in live, we're so glad you're here. This is your chance to join the conversation, ask questions, and get real-time answers from our expert guests. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, we're here to inspire, educate, and help you become the angler you've always wanted. Today's guest has spent years perfecting their craft, exploring the water's toughest challenges, and unlocking the secrets to consistent success. This is your opportunity to learn from someone who's been there, done that, and can help you elevate your game. So get ready for an episode that will leave you motivated, better informed, and eager to hit the water with a whole new strategy. If you have questions, drop them in the chat, and we'll get them answered live during the show. All right, let's jump right into today's episode. We've got an incredible guest lined up, someone whose expertise and experience has reshaped the way anglers approach their craft. Don Clowes has spent years mastering the art and science of rod building and musky fishing, contributing groundbreaking designs and sharing invaluable insights that have helped countless anglers elevate their skills. From incredible works of art to once-in-a-lifetime catches, they've made a lasting impact on the angling community, and I can't wait to dive into this one. So without further ado, let's bring Don into the studio. Don Clowes, welcome to the Angler's Wisdom Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chuck. Good to be here.
So for those who don't know who you are, can you just give us like a quick intro of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I guess you would say I'm a longtime rod builder. I've been doing this for about 50 years now, which is, well, I guess that tells you a little bit about my age, but I've been doing it since I was 15 years old. So I was a rod builder before I was a musky fisher. I started out with pretty simple tackle to begin with. And one of the things that over time I got to see is the stuff I had wasn't the best stuff that I saw on racks and wasn't the best stuff I could afford. So I started dabbling in rod building, like I say, when I was 15. And after many years and many rods built, I've come a long way. I've done a lot of learning at the national level, done a lot of reading, and really living in these days, information available to rod builders is just incredible now. As far as where the musky fishing comes in, I'd call myself a multi-species freshwater angler, and when you fish for everything, you run across fish that you may gravitate toward more than others eventually. In the course of crappie fishing and bass fishing, I've had encounters with muskies that go back years, and You know, they're big. They can be mean. They're impressive. And having said all that, I've kind of landed on spending a lot of time chasing them, and I had some success. So that's a bit about it. I still like all the fish, but I really like the musky fishing. And having said that, I like building all types of rods as well. But, the rods that you really have in your hands the most, I feel like those are the ones that you can speak the most to. So, that's kind of where I'm at with fishing and rod building, both.
Yeah, I think, with fishing, at least for me, it seems to be a progression. Once I get to a certain comfort level with a certain species, I jump on those opportunities to dive into something else or something that's unique, like long-nosed gar, and just deep dive and try to learn whatever I can, kind of like musky fishing. If I had a musky lake that was closer than an hour, I'd probably get out there a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. The muskies for me have been a conquest. I mean, there's always a bigger one to get, but I can't say that I've ever caught a really massive crappie. That's kind of an attraction to me now, and I've caught bass 5 pounds. I've never caught a 7. So there's other conquests to be had. So.
Right. And it's just, depends on what opportunity you have at the moment. If you're traveling or something like that, like I know you just got back from an expo. If there's a bass lake, you go and you just try to refine those skills, right?
Yeah, it's what's in front of you. It's like produce. Go for what's on special. That's what I like to do.
Right.
What's in season.
Man, you've been rod building since you were 15 years old.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what you've learned along the way. I mean, you probably have forgot more than most of us will ever know about rod building.
Well, what you couldn't imagine is the number of mistakes that I've made. There are so many mistakes that can be made. Back in the old days, when I started, well, there were books. And books are fantastic. I still love books. They're great. But these days, you can get information to build rods instantly. I mean, there are just a ton of YouTube videos, which are great. There's a tremendous magazine available now to rod builders. There's the expo available to rod builders. I just attended the International Custom Rod Builders Expo. That didn't exist when I was 15. So I had the great opportunity to attend that in the last 20 plus years. That's been fantastic. So much message boards, are available on the internet. You can get, answers to questions that you have. So, a lot of the mistakes that I've made over time, I wouldn't have had to, if I were learning today. So with that, what I would say is these are the good old days to learn and practice rod building. The other thing that comes with today, there were always mail order catalogs. Well, everything had to come mail order. If you wanted something to do with rod building, you probably weren't getting it at Kmart. You had to deal with somebody through the mail. Back in the early days for me, there was a company called Herders, and they had a good bunch of rod building stuff. Another one that's actually still around today is called Netcraft. They're out of Toledo, I believe, and they were a great source for me many years ago. Cabela's had a lot of materials, but now, with eBay and there are many online retailers of parts. It's so easy to get the info. It's easy to get the stuff too. So a lot of good
Right.
things going for it right now.
And on the mistakes, I like to look at them like they weren't failures, right? They were just kind of ways of how not to do a rod.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in rod building, there's a lot of thread work, and one of the mistakes that's the most probably a common mistake. You don't get to eat potato chips while you're handling thread. You can contaminate it, and then you get a bad finish, which there's a process that you go through. You take care to make sure everything's clean, and then you take care to mix things well, and there's just a lot of careful steps to go through that you learn over time. But you're right. They're opportunities. Mistakes are opportunities.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't realize, how maybe oil and just residue on your fingers could, mess up the thread and mess up the finish.
I think this would be like an auto body person, who does painting vehicles. One of the things that's a curse for that world or rod building is silicones. You get a little bit of silicone in the neighborhood, and finishes are gonna fisheye or not adhere. There's a lot of bad things that come from that. So when it comes to mistakes, that would be one that I would circle boldly. Keep clean hands, keep the silicone out of the shop. Don't have it anywhere near.
Right. And definitely don't go out and dig in the garden or clean fish.
No, keep it clean. Well, to the cleanliness thing, I would say this. What you get to see over my shoulder is my rod bench. It's an 11-foot bench. It's where I do my thread work, where the guides get wrapped on with thread. Out in my garage is where the dirty work goes down. If I'm, turning cork handles or wood or foam to shape it, it's a dusty, dirty business. That's garage item. This is the clean room in here.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what first got you hooked into the craft of rod building?
Well, I had a rod that was, I don't know, this was probably a $10 rod, if that. And it had about 3 rod guides on it. And, it worked. It caught bluegills and catfish, which is what I was catching at the time. But, when I went to the store, when I had the opportunity to get to a sporting goods store, I got to see these rods that were, they had more than 3 guides on, and they just looked better. And, I thought, well, geez, maybe I could, if I can't afford to buy that better one, since I already have one, maybe I could just add guides to it. Because from looking at the Netcraft catalog, they sell guides. Yeah. They sell them. So they sell guides and they sell thread. So maybe I could do that. So anyway, there was a company that used to be big in the business. It was called Gudbrod, and Gudbrod sold a kit, and it had 6 spools of thread, and it had 2 bottles of stuff. One was called Color Preserver, and one was called Rod Varnish. And so I bought that kit for, I don't know, $10 or whatever. And they had a book too, how to wrap a rod with Gudbrod. And I got that and bought some guides, and you know what? It's easier than you might think to put a guide on and seal it with finish and varnish. So I did that, and I said, well, I can do this. And then You know, inquisitive as I was, you know, they sold all the parts to make one from scratch. And, you know, the notion was, wow, geez, if I buy these parts, I can make one cheaper than I can buy it. Well, I don't know if that's true, because if you work your way around my shop, you'll see that I could probably have bought a lot of rods for the stuff that I've invested in rod building. So I think that was just a fallacy. But anyway, that was my thinking at the time. And you know, it just went from there. I made one, and then some people saw my work and liked it, and wanted some things that were special. And I just continued on with that forever since then. And, you know, the one thing I would say is there is always something to learn about it. You know, your title is very generous, calling me a master rod builder, but I've been around so many rod builders who are so good at certain aspects of it. It's just mind blowing to see, you know, the level of craftsmanship and artistry that people will put into it, and the time they will take to do it. You know, that really is inspiring to see, and has been for me forever, because I've gotten to see that for the last 40 years. You know, I've been attending events at the national and international level for just years, and there's always a surprise, like somebody's doing something that's like, wow, I didn't see that coming. So it's one of those things that just keeps you coming back. I suppose it's like you're fishing, you know, there's just always something that keeps you coming back to it. And it's the same's true in rod building.
Oh yeah. You know, and part of it is just having the self-awareness to realize that there's so many different people to learn from, right? You know, there's it doesn't matter how good you get, there's always going to be somebody that's, you know, a little bit better. They have, you know, the secret, this technique and all that.
Oh yeah, just so many incredible people in the craft. You know, if you go to Facebook and you look for rod building groups, you'd see things that are just mind blowing. You know, not everybody's into the artistry. I am. You know, I would tell anybody if they were building a rod, you know, if I were telling you, hey, you should try building one, I'd say get yourself a spool of black thread and make it black. That's a good starting point, you know. And you know what? It's going to be great. But, you know, if you're into the art part of it, holy smokes, you can just go to the moon with that. And and trust me, people have.
That's pretty cool. Looks like we have a question. What do we got, Phil? Chris DePaula wants to know, can you review the benefits of longer fishing rods?
Oh, absolutely. Longer rods, now, particularly in musky rods, longer rods are the savior of your body. You know, back, I mentioned I've been doing this for a while. Back in the day, musky rods in particular used to be offered in lengths that ranged from 6 foot up to, if you've got a 7'3" in a rod catalog, I'm talking about the musky blank catalog category. If you got one that was 7'3", that would be considered long. And one thing about custom rod builders, they're always looking for not what somebody wants you to think is the right thing, but what is the right thing for them. And in the world of musky fishing, longer rods are absolutely the right thing, because they give you, I mean, you're just able to cast much easier using the advantage of length. That's one thing. So it's easier on your body. The other thing about a long rod, and this is back to musky fishing again. One thing that's occurred over the years is boats have gotten bigger. You know, when I started out, you know, a 14-foot car top boat was a common boat. You know, that was, I don't know, that was most of the boats out there. But boats got bigger, higher, and in musky fishing, as you might know, one of the practices that is a requirement is to figure eight your bait. As you retrieve it to the boat, you want to do a figure eight. Well, if you're having a 6 or 7 foot rod in a boat that sits high, you're going to have to bend down every time you want to do a figure eight. And it's a good idea to do a deep figure eight sometimes too. So if you want to bend down and fight that every time, more power to you. But a longer rod is going to give you an advantage in ease of doing that figure eight. So one thing about musky fishing, a day of casting is going to beat you down, probably. It's going to wear you down. And, I'm all about keeping my focus and keeping my energy through the day. So if I can save it on the casting, that's energy not wasted. And if I can save it on that figure eight, energy not wasted. So there's your advantage to a longer rod.
Makes a lot of sense,
particularly in musky fishing.
So when you're doing your figure eight, you said sometimes it's important to get a deep figure eight. You're sticking your rod tip at least like a quarter of your rod, maybe deep.
Probably I want to say about 2 feet deep. Yeah, okay. And while we're on that subject of the figure eight, I'll tell you 2 things. These aren't secrets, but these are things I do. One of the things I do at the tip section of a rod is I mentioned about for a beginner to get that spool of black thread. My tip guides are probably going to be black. My tip wraps. So you might look at the first foot or 2 of my rod and they're black. And then as you move down the rod, you might see things start to get spiffy on colors. I might throw some bright orange. I might throw some metallic in as I work my way toward me. The way I look at it is the part that's in my hand is all about me, but the part at the tip is all about the fish. And I want them to not be distracted by anything. I don't want any flash up there. I want it to be just plain as can be. That makes a lot of sense. The other thing I'll say about the tip, if I'm going to bury the first 1.5 or 2 feet into the water, I try and keep those guides as small as they can be within reason. It is a musky rod and they can't be the most micro guides, but I like to keep them small. And the reason I do that, I'll say this, imagine swirling a stick in the water versus swirling a canoe paddle or a kayak paddle in the water. It's a little easier to go with the stick. So I want to keep that profile smaller in the water. Again, I'm looking to save those little tidbits of energy to get me all the way through the day. So smaller guides and no flashy. So that's my 2 musky things.
In those smaller guides, it's probably moving. I mean, it's probably a fraction, but at the end of the day, to catch the biggest fish on the lake, you have to focus on those fractions, right? So a little bit less disturbance maybe by the rod tip, a little less distraction, like you said.
Yeah, it's less turbulence too. So it saves your body, doesn't have the flash, and you said it, a little less turbulence. Yeah.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you, where is that expo at? That Custom Rod Builders Expo?
It's in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Yep, I've been going for years. It's put together by a gentleman by the name of Tom Kirkman. He's the longtime editor and proprietor of Rodmaker magazine, and he puts together the expo as well. and he had it in Charlotte, North Carolina for a while, and then it was in Winston-Salem for a while, or High Point for a while, and it's landed in Winston-Salem for many years now. Great town and great event.
Nice. Looks like we have another question. What do we got, Phil? James wants to know, what's your favorite grip, traditional cork or foam?
Ooh, that's a good question. I am a lover of cork. Cork is, it's traditional. It's natural. It just feels great in the hand. And you know what? Cork's pretty tough. It holds up well. Foam has a place, though. I generally on my trolling rods, I tend to use some foam there. Foam's very economical, and I've got so many different Keller options with foam too. It's if Kellers are a thing for you. Oh, I'll give you a good example of this. I built a rod for a gentleman, and he wanted to have a Philadelphia Eagles theme. And I had this nice green foam. I had some white foam, and it had some black elements to it. And it really, excuse me, it really dialed in nice for him for that. And it was just a trolling rod, so it worked really good from a Keller standpoint. But from a feel standpoint, I really like cork. Now, one thing not mentioned there that I've become a big fan of is carbon fiber grips lately. I don't know if you've had experience with any of them. Cork feels great. Foam has plenty of applications, but carbon fiber, foam core carbon fiber grips are really great. They're really durable, and they really give you a good sensitivity, in the hand too. So I wouldn't sleep on those too. Those are great grips as well.
Interesting. So I've heard with the cork handles, you can kind of sand them down and shape them so that they fit your hand perfectly.
Absolutely. Cork, you can do the same with foam, really.
Okay.
But cork has a little bit more, I guess I would say, rigidity to it. But you said it, Chuck. Cork, I can take it to the lathe, and I've had it here where I've had people in my garage doing the dirty work, and I'll say, okay, let's take a little off here, and let's have you feel that. How's that feel? And then if it's too much, we can take a little more. No, it's a very very workable material. Easily taken down with sandpaper, and I'm sure you've probably felt them where you can have it nice and smooth, and get a really good grip for your hand.
And there's a sealer that you put on the cork after you shape it, right?
Yes.
Or treatment?
You don't have to, but I've become a big fan of it. That's there's a product. It's just called Cork Seal. It's made by a company called Trondak, and it's something that you wouldn't have to be a rod builder to use Cork Seal. If you let's say you had a rod that has been sitting around for a while and you wanted to clean it up, if you took some Scotch-Brite to that to clean up that surface, and then gave it a coat of Cork Seal, it gives it just a little bit more grab, and it gives it some protection too. But that's the stuff. Trondak Cork Seal. Actually, I just bought a bottle of it when I was down at the expo because I needed another one. Good stuff.
So,
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was going to say that's just one of many things that a non-rod builder could apply, who's just a fisherman. you know, to do your own thing or take care of your own stuff.
Well, and like you said, I think it was last summer. Um, one of the guides fell off on one of my rods, and I needed an extra rod for a trip, so I just grabbed some thread and an old guide, and I didn't really have the right stuff. I just used the epoxy used for like fly tying.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look the best. I had white thread, but it saved the rod, and I had a spare because we were going out on Lake St. Clair on the Canadian side, and not really knowing what to expect. You try to set up as many things as you can so you don't have to deal with it on the water.
It's a great skill to have. The thread you used, I'm sure, did the job just fine. There's a lot of 5-minute epoxies, which I've done that in a pinch too. You just take a little bit of 5-minute epoxy, and if you get a popsicle stick, after you get it mixed up, you can kind of smear it around on there, and you know what? It's going to get it done. It's a really good skill to develop. A simple skill, I would add too. And like behind me at the bench, I've got supports and rollers and such. One of the things that's real easy to do, if you had to do a one-off, is a cardboard box. If you take a cardboard box and cut 2 V's, one in each side, that rod will lay in there, and it'll give you a nice place to work. And then the other thing, and this is what I did in the early days of rod building, and it's something anybody can use, is if you take that thread and you pass it through a book, that'll give you a tension device. And you can pick the tension you'd like to work with by how many pages, you have sitting on top of that. So there's your intro. Cardboard box with 2 notches and a book and a spool of thread, and you can go.
That's a great idea, and it saves the money for actually getting the material to build your new custom rod.
Yeah, I would say to anybody, if you didn't want to develop that skill, it's good to know a rod builder, because I know so many people who there are rods laid in the corner just because they have a broken tip or one bad guide. The rod, you can't use it until you get that fixed. So I would encourage anybody to develop the skill to do it. But outside of that, don't hesitate to chase down a rod builder, because if all you need is a guide, that's not too much to get done.
Right. Or maybe you have your dad's or grandfather's old fishing rod that's 60, 70 years old, that's just beat up, and you'd like to get that freshened up, maybe hanging on the wall or something.
Yeah, a little bit of love, and you can have a piece that you can display. Yep.
So what makes a custom rod superior to just the off-the-shelf models?
Well, for starters, I would say to anybody, if you can find that off-the-shelf rod that really meets your needs, if it fits your hand right, if it does what you want it to do, and you're happy with it, I'd say that's the way you got to go. Because a custom rod builder can never deliver to you as economically what a factory mass-produced rod can deliver. It's just not possible. But when you're into what I would consider high performance fishing, or if you just happen to be a particular sort, or if you really, want to dial into the whole art thing, then in a custom rod, you can really tailor a rod to a person. Now, people come in different sizes. There are short people, tall people. And then hands come in different sizes too. You got people with little bitty hands and ones with big hands. Now, one thing you'll see in factory rods is they kind of look like they're supposed to. If you look at a rod and say, oh, well, that looks like what I've seen forever, and they all look about right, and that's all good. But we all know that people are different. I made a reference to Tom Kirkman earlier, the editor of Rodmaker magazine. He collected some articles together, and he did a deep dive into the ergonomics of fishing rods and grips, and revealed some things that you're probably not going to see on many rod racks in commercial rods, and that is, a lot of people have a bigger hand, and so if you look at lighter rods, for example, you oftentimes see these real small reel seats and smaller grips. And the one thing I would say is, well, is that your hand? In my case, it isn't. My hand's a little bit bigger. He makes another point in his collective on rod ergonomics, and that is that if you look at a bag of golf clubs, if you look at the grips on the clubs, there's an array of clubs for different applications, but the grips are all the same. And I would say to a fisherman, well, I don't know how many rods you have or how many different types of fishing you do, but does your hand change? It probably doesn't. Your hand doesn't change. So why should your grip be tiny on this one and big on this one? That's it's a thing where, things should just fit. A lot of rods, this is another ergonomic thing. On a spinning rod, for example, I used to see spinning rods that were tapered at the back. And if you use that for a grip, that taper is kind of backwards of what it ought to be for a good grip. It'd be better if it were reversed. Those are just a couple of examples. The other thing is the quality of the materials that might go into a custom rod. If you're, this is back to that high performance thing again. If you're fishing saltwater, you can buy guides that have additional corrosion resistance, titanium finishes and such. If you're really hammering, if you're guiding and doing a lot of hard work, a lot of casting, you can buy guides that have better ring quality than you might find on a factory rod. I will say though, the state of the art, even on factory rods, is very high today. Guide rings have come a long way from where they were. I used to see guides with grooves in, from fishing wear and tear. And I have to say the state of the art of guide manufacture is very high today. Very, very good stuff out there today. What
you
else?
had mentioned saltwater, and I know there was a guy that was asking earlier. He was considering getting a musky rod or something like a musky rod and utilizing it for like bull reds.
Oh, yeah. I saw his comment and it made me laugh because back in, this kind of relates to the long rod question about fishing rods. Back in the day, I mentioned that the long rod would be like 7'3". Well, builders of custom musky rods back then, they had to reach outside of what would be in the musky blank category to get longer rods. And to do that, they went to surf rods. For example, if you're looking at a manufacturer's list of blanks, they'll say, these are blanks for salmon. These are blanks for this. Custom rod builders, they don't pay any attention to that. They say, what will they do what I want them to do? And if you were winding the clock back to that day, the custom musky rod builder would say, those blanks that you call musky aren't doing what I want them to do. And you know what will? surf rods will, because they make them long. And so what made me laugh was using that 8-foot surf rod is probably not a bad idea at all. I would say, though, that these days there are musky rod offerings that extend to 10 feet. So they are findable now, and they would be fine. But I wouldn't steer them away from the surf rod either, because that gets it done probably for the job he's after. So
Good to know.
so yeah, surf rods came to musky fishing before musky rods found their way to the salt water that he's catching that nice drum in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if you were going to give a newbie some advice, they're trying to, thinking about getting into rod building, what would it be? Just like basic starting off.
The first thing I would say is pay a visit to rodbuilding.org. That's a message board for rod builders. And it has sponsorship, so you can see who's selling the stuff, but you can also get, you can see real questions, and it's a massive volume of questions about, various rod building topics. As much as I'm not a big fan of rod kits. There are rod building kits that you can buy. And I wouldn't steer anybody away from that as a starting point. And I would say the reason I would be hesitant to say that is, well, there are so many custom things that you can do. A kit's going to give you that cookie cutter. This is what one's supposed to be. So what you might wind up doing is just building what would be a companion to a factory rod, but you build it. And that's not a bad start, because that would be good ground to cover to learn the skills. So what you would get with a kit would be, you would get a rod blank, and then you would get some grips, you'd get a reel seat. And I think they might even some kits give you the glues that you need. And that would let you get some skills, basic skills, to put one together, gluing on the grip, maybe reaming the grip, getting it in place, lining things up, and then a little bit of practice putting guides on, gluing a tip on. And I would tell anybody that the kit isn't going to give you don't let that be the one you're dreaming of. Let that be the one that, get you your foot in the door, and
right.
And keep it simple. Then, get that basic fundamentals of handling thread, and but by all means, pay attention to some of the information you might be able to get from the internet to give you the pointers. It's like, how should I prep a surface?
Right.
And how should I mix glue? And, what do I need to think about? But a kit's a good starting point.
Looks like we have another question from the audience. What do we got, Phil? Roy wants to know, if you were blindfolded, could you tell a Walmart rod from a custom?
I don't know that I could. I will say there are some quality, even though they're mass produced, there are some quality mass produced rods out there that really do the job. So I don't know that I could. It'd be hard to say. Kind of need the eyes on it.
Right. James wants to know, do you ever use fiberglass blanks, or is it mostly composite?
Well, mostly, I guess there are three categories. There's fiberglass, and then there's carbon fiber, and then there's a composite, which might include some carbon fiber and fiberglass in between. I gotta say that fiberglass offerings are not all that widespread these days. There's still fiberglass out there, and fiberglass has a great application, particularly for trolling. It's fiberglass is by nature heavier, but fiberglass is tough. It's just durable and tough, and it's probably not the rod you want to have in your hand all day long. In most cases, some fiberglass is just fine. But composites, I really like a lot for trolling rods, because what many manufacturers will do, they'll have carbon fiber in the butt section of the rod where you want some stiffness, and then as you get out to the tip where you want some toughness, they'll incorporate some fiberglass, and that seems to be a good marriage of the two. Of course, there's carbon fiber at the other end of the spectrum, which are great for there's great carbon fiber rods for many applications, but for that trolling, that fiberglass is great. And I don't build these, but I know a lot of the guys that use crankbaits for bass love fiberglass. Something about it. You're just cranking, and they don't need that sensitivity that you might find with a carbon fiber. It has an application there. I don't know that much about it, but I know it has a place there. So
I've heard about that. As a matter of fact, I think my Lose 8X stick is fiberglass.
mm-hmm.
But you're throwing deep diving crankbaits that are maybe diving 20, 25 feet deep.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. If you're reeling aggressively, you get a hard enough hit with a, non-fiberglass rod, you might just snap it.
Yeah. And with I think the sensitivity of carbon fiber might be more than you really want. You want that doing its thing down there. And when
Right.
you get that hit, fiberglass is going to be all the sensitivity you need.
Exactly.
One thing I'll say about fiberglass is more forgiving than carbon fiber. I look at it like a carbon fiber can be like a race car. A race car can be faster, it can fly, it can do what it's got to do, but don't you dare ding a fender or you're going off the rails. Where fiberglass, you got some forgiveness there. If you bump it against the gunnel or get a nick in it, you might be okay. Carbon fiber could be game over. It's high performance but less forgiving.
Yeah, very very delicate, as I like to call it.
Yep.
I've broke a handful.
Yeah.
But we won't talk about that.
Yeah, me too.
We do have another question. Steve, the guy from the saltwater. Would you need more than one musky rod if you cast with heavy lures and lighter lures?
Well, I would. You don't have to, but I would. I would want one for the lighter stuff. Again,
Like
back to the ease of
maybe?
casting. Yeah, like for example, I have a rod. I call it my sturgeon rod. It's a pretty. It's not for sturgeon, but I just have a decal of a sturgeon on because it's a pretty substantial one. But it works great for jerk baits, which can be bigger. But if I wanted to do a smaller bait, I could cast it with that, but it's going to be more work for me. I would want a lighter rod that would let that tip load up a little bit to help me out with the cast. Back to that, saving my body again. Having that little bit lighter rod will make that casting easier. So I would want to have two. I mean, people will probably want to have more than two, but I think two. I would want to have a lighter and a heavier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of the spectrum, and I know very little about musky fishing, but you have a double-bladed bucktail versus like a Medusa, right? I mean,
yeah.
You got this big chunk of plastic you're throwing out there, and then you just have that lightweight bucktail.
Yeah. Now for me, I say too, I'm not of a shape or desire to throw those 1 pound chunks of rubber out there. A lot of guys are doing that now. If I were doing that, I'd probably have the next notch up too, because I've built them, for that purpose. That's more work than I want to do. I mean, I like catching the big muskies, but that's a lot of work.
Yeah, that generally leads to shoulder surgery, right?
Oh, shoulder surgery, tennis elbow. Yeah, I have no desire for surgeries. I'd like to keep things the way they are, and I've found that the rods that I have, you know what? There's a time in the past when I used rods that weren't built just right, and I had some wicked tennis elbow. And I don't know if you've ever had tennis elbow, but it can take a long time to go away, and it's a real drag. But what I've found is with the right ergonomics of a musky rod handle, you can avoid that. I don't know if I could build one to avoid the grief that would come from throwing a 1 pound chunk of rubber or more. Some are more than that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Some of those things are massive.
Yeah, it's crazy. The stuff some guys throw. Better physical specimens than me.
Looks like we got another question on board. Roy wants to know, would you use a 10-foot rod in a kayak?
I don't believe I would. I think for me in the kayak, there are probably two considerations I would make on a rod. I would want to be able to have a rod long enough to reach around, so if I had a fish that was trying to take me under, I might be able to coax him around. I don't think I'd want to go a lot further than that. And I don't know enough about the kayak business to know how, if you need to make colossal casts. If there were an application for that, well, that 10-foot would be great. 10-foot seems like a lot to deal with in a kayak. That's a lot of stuff flying around.
Especially when you're trying to net that fish, because you don't really there's nobody generally around to net your fish. So when you net your fish, you're bringing that tip all the way up. And I could just imagine with a 10-foot rod, it's going to take a lot to get that fish actually out of the water enough to scoop under it.
That's a very good point, and it brings another point that I would make. One of the problems that you might get with a rod in failures is a thing we call high sticking. When you have that rod straight up in the air and all that force is pulling down from the tip, you're putting that incredible amount of stress on the tip. The weakest part of the rod, really. There aren't that many fibers up there. So if you could picture 3 different scenarios, there's one where you might have the rod down in the water and then the fish is pulling against it. So you're the opposite of a high stick situation. And then if you're in a moderate depth boat, you can be fighting the fish and the tip is bent. But the kayak puts you in I would say the greatest harm's way for high sticking, for just what you said. You said about trying to get that fish to the boat. So by nature, you have to have that rod up pretty high to get that fish in close. So the 10-footer would be the most susceptible to problems.
Right.
And I would probably avoid it for that reason alone.
Yeah, definitely, because it's there's a fine line. You want to try to keep the fish under the water as much as possible, and then right at that moment, depending on what you're throwing, you're gonna lift that rod up just enough to get that head just out of the water, and you're bringing your net underneath up into the fish.
Mhm.
So you do have that split second where, your tip can get pretty high, especially if the fish decides at that moment it's not going to cooperate.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes if you've ever watched any like bass tournament fishing, those guys are ripping fish out of the water. I can't imagine how many rods they break with the behaviors that they use in those.
Oh yeah.
Because those aren't methods that are friendly to rod tips. Some of the things that are done, and I'd hate to see somebody out in a kayak be succumb to that tip breakage because of that.
Right. If you guys are interested in finding out a little bit more about musky fishing from the kayak, back on the Lake Erie Kayak Anglers podcast, I had my buddy Derek Hollis on, and he's been targeting musky from the kayak, I don't know, probably 5-6 years now, maybe longer. And he's in deep. So if you want some information on catching musky from a kayak, that's the guy that I would ask.
Yeah, that's a challenge there. I do most of mine from a boat. My feet are square on the floor. I've got some leverage. You do it in a kayak. That's getting it done.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I believe he just got cleared to get back to fishing from shoulder surgery.
Oh no! Ouch. Yeah.
So he's been sidelined for a while. He's dying to get out there.
I bet I gotta think he's got a lot of company in the musky fishing world with shoulder scars.
Yeah,
I'm fortunate to not have had that happen yet. So
I think he likes throwing some of the bigger stuff too, but he kind of, he has a little bit of everything. But I tell you, a lot of times he's successful. I mean, musky, it's not like you just go out there, close your eyes, and throw a bait out. It's a little bit more challenging than that, right? Fishing without the cast.
There are a few tricks, yes.
So what are the biggest mistakes that you see anglers make when trying to, or beginner anglers make when trying to fish for musky?
Probably not thinking through all the way to actually landing a fish. I mean, when you set out, you have to have in your mind that it's going to happen. You're going to get one. You can't say, I hope I get one. You say it's going to happen. And my partner, Chris, he is the one who has a laser focus that I can't even say mine equals. You have to have a laser focus all the time, not part of the time, all the time, every cast. You have to have it, and that's what will make success. So I would think a beginner, the flaw would be a lackadaisical attitude about retrieving and casting, discipline to make every cast the one that's going to be the one. That would be a mistake. And then gear can be a mistake too. I like to say, you need to bring enough gun. You need the right rod, you need a decent reel, and you need quality line. You need all those pieces. You need to pay attention to good knots. Keep in mind, it's going to happen. So you need to have to be ready at every cast. So that nicks in the line, that has to get done. Sharp hooks. The hooks, make sure they're sharp. Don't just grab one out of the box and say, I know it's good. Check it. The hooks need to be good. And and then pay attention. Then of course studying the water is important, but those gear things are very important. And then on the other end of it, once success does happen, it's very important to be prepared for when it does happen with the proper tools to handle a fish and release a fish safely. So, it would be a real shame to finally, somebody makes the conquest of getting the fish they want and then not be ready to deal with it and kill it.
Right.
It's good to have quality needle nose pliers and hook cutters if needed, good quality net. So,
And
so
sometimes you just got to cut the net to get the fish loose.
yeah,
When you get your hook buried, sometimes you just got to make that sacrifice. Because these fish are very delicate. And
yeah, they're delicate
everyone can do
and
that.
precious. They're probably existing in the lowest density of any fish in a body of water where they swim. They take forever to grow big. So fish handling is super important to keep those fish in the water.
Absolutely.
Keep them alive. So,
And one of the things that you said was, you have to treat it like every cast could be the cast, right? All the way back to the boat. Obviously on videos, I've seen it because I'm not much of a musky fisherman yet, but a lot of times it's right before they're pulling the lure out of the water, right? Or in the figure eight. They're like lifting out of the water and that musky comes in and hits it. So never give up throughout the way.
Yeah. And I guess you make another good point. A lot of people do a lazy job of the figure eight. As you're getting that retrieved to the boat, you need to be paying attention to the water and looking for a glint of anything that might be. And even if you don't see anything, you need to go into that figure eight. And there are particulars about the figure eight. Some of them are like a lazy L. Some of them are a nice big deep figure eight. But that's an important thing to do every time. I can't tell you how many times it's happened to me where I've gone into the figure eight, never saw a fish, and then when I make that second turn, boom, I got a fish on. So if you don't do the figure eight, you will be missing. You'll be leaving fish that you could have caught.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be a figure eight, right? Because I know with the kayak, just because we're in the seated position most of the time, we can't really get down there, stick half our rod in the water to get that figure eight. So a lot of the time, it's bringing it around the kayak like this, back around to the other side over the bow,
Right.
and just kind of creating like a little loop system.
Right. Just give them a chance to commit. That's what you want to do. It could be a big oval, or it could be that figure eight, or it could just be an L.
Keeping that bait in the water longer.
Right. Keep it in the water longer. And one of the things to think about is the fish you want to catch. Everybody wants the bigger one, and the bigger ones, think of like an aircraft carrier. They don't turn on a dime. They need a little room. So when you're making that figure eight, that's where the big figure eight comes in, to give them a chance to be able to navigate it. Also, that's back to the longer rod again. That's where the longer rod comes in to let you make a bigger figure eight, bigger and sometimes deeper. So length is a good thing in muskies.
So if you could pick just one musky rod setup, like what would be your ideal musky rod setup from blank to reel, or even just something that somebody should look for if they're looking to get into doing musky fishing?
Well, I would probably start with a blank, a rod length of I'd want to say at least 8 feet. I like a little longer than that. I like 8.5. I have 9. So I would say at least 8 feet for starters. As a reel goes, I have a Shimano Calcutta 400, an older reel. More recently, I have a Shimano Tranx 400, and Shimano is just really good. I have a Daiwa Lexa casting reel too. I'm big fans of both of those. So if you had an 8.5 foot rod with a Shimano Tranx on it, and that rod, I would say, it should be able to deal with baits that range from 2 ounces to 6 ounces. That would be a nice range. I think that would be a good rig for anybody to get started with. And now pulled up on that Tranx would be probably an 80-pound braid line, for most waters. That would be good. Like to use a steel leader. But I like to do all types of baits. I like fishing with rubber tubes. I like bucktail spinners. I like jerk baits, and I like some crank baiting too, and twitch baiting. So, when you start getting into that, there's a whole array of baits you can have, and so that'd be the one.
Yeah.
That would be the one I would start with. Oh, I left one thing out about, when I was telling you about my particulars on a musky rod. One thing that I do that you don't see on rods on the rack is the spiral wrap. I don't know if you're familiar with that. This would be in a casting rod. My musky rods are conventional casting rods, but if to the untrained eye they look weird. The guides at the tip are faced downward like a spinning rod would be, but then the reel is on the top of the rod in a conventional casting situation. So you would say, well, why is that? Well, the answer is it gives you the benefit of a spinning rod with the line downward, pulling away from the rod blank. And when it's pulling down, keep in mind all these components are fixed. Then when it's pulling down, it's forcing the top of the rod to be at the top. It's not wanting to pull it off to the side. The forces are making it want to stand up straight. So anyway, that's the spiral wrap. And what that gives you, it just forces that reel to the top and it keeps it from torquing in your hand. So that's a great advantage to the spiral wrap. And that's another thing that I like to incorporate.
Interesting. I know what I was going to ask. Do you prefer the steel leader versus the, is it vinyl, the plastic?
Fluorocarbon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It is fluorocarbon.
Yeah, I do like the steel. Yeah. It's a trade-off, a fluorocarbon, to have one big enough and heavy enough for musky. A lot of guys use them. You can. But I just have that trust in steel. Usually things are happening fast with a musky. He's coming in from a distance, and visually, I don't think the steel leader is a hindrance. I just have so much confidence in the steel. It's I'm not saying it's bulletproof, but it's dang near bulletproof. I have looked at fluorocarbon leaders under the microscope after one's been through some stuff, and they can get nicked up, and anytime you have a nick, bad things can happen. So I trust the steel.
Yeah, and those fluorocarbon ones, they're so thick. It's got to add some kind of effect on the bait. The other thing I was going to ask was, obviously you prefer like blackened the steel leaders versus just the
Yeah, I like the ones
Or
that
something like that.
I buy these ones. There's a company called Mason that sell bright stainless steel, and they sell like a brownish. I like the brown. Yeah. I don't know what they do to it, but yeah, I like the look of that better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I did want to kind of bounce back into the fish handling part of things. Just so we can give people, some advice. They're going out there, fishing for muskie, how they handle them. I guess before that, we should probably get we have a question from the audience real quick. Steve wants to know, does a spiral wrap go to the left or to the right?
It depends on you. I am right-handed, and so for me, the spiral goes to the right. If I were building for a left-hander, the spiral goes to the left, and that's just so when you're casting, the line is away. That's just my thing, So I would ask anybody I was building for. It's like, okay, which way you cast it?
Right.
Yep, right or left.
So, why don't you break down the important factors of fish handling? Handling a muskie, what to prepare for. Obviously, to keep the fish healthy and a clean release, but also, for the person catching the fish as well, because there's teeth and sharp gill plates.
Good point. Yeah. They sell fish handling gloves, which I keep, and I like to slap one of those on, just like you said, those sharp gill plates. And so if you have, one of the things you want to do is, I mentioned about being ready to see it through. And part of being ready to see it through is having your boat deck clear. Don't be having a lot of lures laying around or a bunch of junk to trip over, or having stuff tucked away in compartments that you can't find. If you're musky fishing, those cutters should be at the ready. Those pliers should be at the ready. And you don't want a bunch of stuff where you got to be walking around, because it's chaos, when that happens, when a big fish is hooked and it's showtime to fight and land that fish, you want to be ready. The net has to be ready. Can't have the net cover on, and you can't have it under a bunch of life jackets. It's got to be ready to go. So this is another thing my buddy Chris would tell you. Let's be ready. You got to have that focus on every cast, but you got to have that focus on the end game too. So then when that time comes, you're able to get that net and not hook a bunch of lures on the way, not have to take an extra, couple of minutes to get it ready. And then you get that net and get that fish netted, and then keep that fish in the water. And then you start to do business. And that is, reach down and find that, the fish's mouth and see what has to be done, and do that quickly, so that would mean find the hooking situation and see if you can extract your hooks with with your needle nose pliers. Hopefully that would be the case, but if not, you got to be ready to sacrifice some hooks, and that's where the hook cutters come in. Nipex makes, this is a tool company. They make some very good hook cutters that can deal with musky hooks quickly. And everything you want to do it quickly. So, if you have to lose hooks, you do. You just got to cut those hooks and get that bait out of there as quick as you can. And then
I was just going to add real quick, worst case scenario, because if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. It's perfectly okay to leave that fish in the net while you're trying to figure it out in the water, right? It's hooked up in in, with the bait, but as long as it's still in the water, it's still breathing, it's gonna hang out and chill,
Right.
and buy you some more time.
Yep. And that's what you want to do. You want to keep that fish in the water. And, you know, a lot of people like to measure the fish. If by all means, if you must measure a fish, they make floating rulers that can go in the water, and you can measure a fish right in the water. It's better if you don't have to take that fish out of the water. And I would say every fish doesn't need a held up in the air picture. When I can appreciate a lot of people like to have photos of fish, and great fish, for example. I do too, but every fish doesn't need photographed. And when you hold up a fish, especially for a new person, a new person holding a fish, that fish is in harm's way of, falling into the boat floor. And you really don't want that to happen. So if you don't need to hold it up, don't need a photo, keep that thing in the water and let it swim away.
And that's a great point about that floating measuring board, because when we're tournament fishing or anything like that, or if I'm just planning on releasing the fish and I want to get a good measurement on it, I always dip my board into the water. That way, wet the board, it protects the slime coat on the fish a little bit better. So I could see how that would definitely help.
Absolutely, yeah. Bump boards for muskies are a thing. They're not a thing I'm a big fan of, but if they had to be used, by all means, what you just said makes sense. Get them wet, cool them down. A hot bump board that's dry, that would just be horrible for a muskie to lay on there.
Right.
That's wetting that. Good advice. But you know what? As great as a photo holding up a fish is, there are a lot of great release photos that I've seen that take place right in the water. The best thing you can do for the fish.
Yep. And if you want to, just take a video,
Yeah.
video the release. My personal best walleye hopefully is still swimming out there, but I get to go back and enjoy that catch and enjoy watching it swim away. Yeah. Without sacrificing the fish because the camera was just rolling.
Yeah, it's what makes musky fishing, the fishing that we get to enjoy, what it is. Muskies Inc., who I'm a member, popularized catch and release many years ago, and it's paid dividends because those fish can be enjoyed time and again, and they take so long to grow, especially the big ones. It's just sad to see one expire from bad handling or abuse.
Right. And I want to kind of talk about some seasonal changes for muskie, but before we move on to that, summertime is kind of like an off limits. I mean, not legally, but it's really when you don't want to target the muskie, right? Because the water's too hot, the air temperature's too hot, and you're really putting that.
Yeah, when water temperatures get too high, the water holds less oxygen, and it's harder on probably any fish, but very hard on muskies. And it's controversial. There are, a lot of times tournaments aren't even held in hot water times, and hot water is relative. If you go to July one year, you might have, temperatures that exceed 80 degrees. And in other years, you might be in the low 70s, which is probably okay. So, in general, it's probably good to avoid, those hot waters with muskies. And particularly, it's particularly terrible to drag a muskie up from cooler waters. This would be fishing deep. If you're fishing for a muskie in 4 feet of water, even if the temperature's kind of elevated, that muskie's living in that, in that 4 feet. But if you drag one up from 20 feet, and then you try to release it into that hot layer on the top, that's really bad. That barotrauma, they like to refer to it as, and that's bad business. But in general, a lot of musky fishers will lay low when those temperatures get too hot, and that's probably good practice.
Yep.
You know, different schools of thought on that, but
Well,
a lot of guys back off.
Respect the fish, respect the environment, and earn yourself some good karma. Just like we were talking about before the show.
Yeah.
How I can't walk past a piece of trash if it's laying on the beach or in the woods or anywhere like that. I just have to kind of go off the beaten path and pick it up. And you laugh telling me about a time you lost your phone doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's one thing. This is kind of related to muskies. My muskie club. We have an adopted shoreline. We call it at one of our local lakes, and we tend to it. A couple times a year, and gather up what might have blown out of somebody's boat or been discarded. And, it's just the best we can do. Try and keep it looking the way I like to have things looking the way I'd like to see them, and that is in their natural state. And our club does a good job with that.
I agree with that. So how does seasonal changes affect muskie behavior, and which should anglers adjust?
Well, it varies where you're at. Some places have, here where I'm at in Ohio, there are no seasons. You can fish them anytime you can fish them. Other places, you don't even start till June. So the one thing that'll happen as soon as the ice goes out, those fish are going to be getting ready to prepare to spawn. Now, spawning isn't necessarily always successful in every water, and unfortunately, our Ohio waters don't have a real high spawning success, if any. But that doesn't mean they won't try. So they'll be setting up in those warmer areas, thinking about spawning, and you can find them there in the spring. As time moves on, they'll move out and they'll establish themselves on, if you have weeds, you can hunt for them in weeds. But in summer, they're out there in open water. Those muskies are. It's not like some fish where they're relating to a lot. They're out in open water. In our waters, in particular, we have shad as a primary forage base. So, those shad are everywhere, and where you can find them, that's where you're going to find those muskies. Because they're not looking for anything special. They're just looking to eat. If the attempt to mate is done, then beyond that, it's all about eating. And so they'll be looking for those shad wherever they can find them. So,
one question I just thought of: is there a difference between? I mean, I'm sure there's a difference between their habits, but between a river muskie and a lake muskie?
I've caught them both places. Habits. I think river muskies. I really like fishing for them because you kind of, in general, know where they're going to be. They like a little bit of current. They like that oxygen that comes from some current. And when they're in a feeding mode, they're not afraid to be out in that current. But if you can, I don't think they would be a lot different than a lot of fish, where if you were sizing up a river to say, I think there's going to be one here, I think, they share that with, they don't have anything special over any other fish in a river. They're going to look for the places that are, friendly places to hang out and also feed. So I don't think they're that different. Um, but they do have, holding their position in a river is something that's harder, of course, for a river fish than a lake fish. Lake fish can just hang out and look for food, but that river fish has to conserve some of that energy too, in addition to feeding. So,
Right.
not that different, but the situations are different.
Well, so let's talk about the 120 Outdoors podcast that you are a co-host of.
Oh yeah,
with
I'm a big
Chris
fan.
Capalla. You say you're a big fan?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, me too. It's it's a great show. If you haven't checked it out, definitely go over to Spotify and all the podcast platforms and check out the 120 Outdoors podcast with Chris Capalla and Don Clowes.
Yeah. Chris and we've been doing that for, we started back in 2020 during the COVID year. And you know what? It's been a great thing for us. And one of the greatest things is, Chris is a curious type and I'm a curious type. And if you listen to our podcast, you'll find out quickly that we're all over the map. We're not talking about one type of fish or even just fish. We're all over the place. We like to say we both like to hunt. We both like to fish multi-species. So we're all over the map. So if you were looking to dive down a rabbit hole, that's not what our podcast is. We're a curiosity podcast, and we get into all things that are many types of fishing, hunting that we get to enjoy, and we're both passionate about conservation as well. So we try and introduce those important elements of conservation, where they fit. And we've talked about some of the things that are a threat to both the hunting and the fishing that we enjoy. We're both haters of invasive species that can wreck everything, and we like to see properly managed woodlands, and we'd like to see native plants, and things are very connected. The waters that are connected to the lands, and if we can care for those, we can have better fishing and better hunting, and we're about all that stuff.
Yeah, it's a great show. I try to catch as many as I can. It's kind of like this one though. We tend to run over.
Yeah, I can't tell you about how much stuff we've learned. That's the great thing. We pick topics that we're curious about, but we wind up learning things that we had no idea. So that's
the best part, right? That's why we show up every week.
Mm-hmm.
So where can listeners follow your work, and how can they connect with you and support what you're doing? Do you build rods for other people?
I do. I don't chase too much commercial work. I mean, I could be reached probably through our podcast if anybody were curious. And I would encourage anybody to give us a listen. Of course, we're on Spotify and all the podcast platforms, but we can be reached there. We got a Facebook page, and anybody wanted to contact me, they could reach me through there.
And I'll drop those links as well for those.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I lost my notes. Oh, here we go. All right. We're an hour and a half in. Sorry about the long show. But it was a ton of great information, a little bit of rod building, a little bit of musky building or musky fishing. So before we let you off the hook, we're going to reel you back in for one last piece of angler's wisdom.
All right.
Don't worry. It's a catch and release kind of question, so I think you'll like it. If you had to choose one or two key pieces of angler's wisdom, whether something you've learned through experience or a valuable lesson passed down to you, what would they be, and why do you think they're so important for other anglers to hear?
Whew. Well, I think it would be appreciate the waters and lands that you have, and do everything you can to take care of them, because they're a little bit fragile. You know, I mentioned to you earlier, Chuck, that I'm all about cleaning things up, and I've seen places go that I know were great places at one time just be trashed, and then I've seen them come back. So I would say do what you can to keep those places good. Don't assume things are going to be great all the time. Do the things you can do to keep them that way or make them better. So that would be it, I think.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Lake Erie is a perfect example. You know, if it wasn't for many people doing their part and taking the time to give back to the water, you know, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it's one of the best comeback stories in the world.
Oh, yeah. I'm a giant fan of the Great Lakes. I just finished a book about the Great Lakes. It was titled The Death
and Life.
Ah, you've read it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Darcy Egan put me onto that, and I read it, and that's just absolutely fascinating. Boy, if you care anything about the Great Lakes, I would say, boy, you got to read this book.
It is definitely a must-have. It's called The Death and Life of the Great Lakes by Dan Egan.
Darcy Egan.
No, Darcy.
Dan Egan. Yeah, Yeah.
Yeah. I don't believe they are related. Ironically, they have the same last name, but
right. And Darcy said that. He said we're not related. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think that's where I got it, was from your podcast when you had him on here. Which Darcy was supposed to be on this week, but he had a doctor's appointment, so we had to switch a couple of things.
Yeah. If you're a Great Lakes fan, I would point out one other thing you should do. This, you don't have to read this, but you can watch it. Have you heard of the documentary called The Fish Thief?
What's it called?
The Fish Thief.
The Fish Leave?
Thief.
Feet?
A thief, like in robber.
Oh, gotcha. The Fish Thief.
If you're a Great Lakes guy, you got to see that documentary.
I'm writing that down. I'm sure I'll be able to find it, and I'll drop that in the description as well.
Yeah, it was. I streamed it on Amazon Prime here not too long ago. It was on there. Fantastic story there. I'll give you this name to remember: Vernon Applegate. I'll leave it at that. You probably read that if you looked at.
Why does that sound familiar?
He's the guy that figured out the sea lamprey.
Oh, okay.
So
interesting.
He factors into the fish thief also. So
that's awesome. I will definitely try to get all those links down in the description. Probably be like 24 hours or so. And then this show will drop on Spotify and all the other podcast platforms Monday morning at 5 a.m. And then next week, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will be back here live for another episode of the Angler's Wisdom Podcast. Don, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoy you joining us today and sharing the vast amount of Angler's wisdom.
Pleasure's all mine, Chuck. Thanks for
having me. All right, guys. We will see you next Thursday on the Angler's Wisdom Podcast.
Thank you for joining us today on the Angler's Wisdom Podcast. We hope you got some good insight out of the show and learned something new. Don't forget to go over to ampedoutdoors.com and support the title sponsor of the show. Follow them on social media and just show them some love. And lastly, head over to LakeErieKayakFishing.com and check out all the many resources as well as opportunities to book an unforgettable Lake Erie kayak fishing adventure with yours truly. You can also get yourself a Lake Erie kayak fishing gift card, the obsessed angler in your life. And remember, fishing is life, but safety comes first. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next Thursday live on the Angler's Wisdom Podcast.
Oh, yeah! Yeah!
Oh! Oh, it's a nice one.
Yeah!